강연 내용에 대해서 김종근 선생님이 잠깐 이제 코멘트를 좀 해주시고요. 그 다음에 바로 이제 대담 진영으로 제 포지션을 해가지고 방청석과 함께 방청석에 계시는 그 궁금한 내용들을 가지고 계시는 분들이 계실 것 같은데요. 함께 이야기를 나눠보도록 하겠습니다. 일단 조금 말씀하실 게 있으면 좀 짧게 해주시면
네, 지금 이번 강연에서 그 이컬러지에 대한 지배적 담론들을 이제 분석하고 해체하는 시간이었던 것 같습니다. 그래서 뭐 여러 가지 얘기들 마치 이제 카르토그래피를 보는 듯한 느낌이었습니다. 근데 이게 크게 이제 그 생태학적인 문제는 기술적으로 해결이 가능하다 이런 담론들, 지배적 담론이죠. 이걸 이제 해체했고요. 또 다른 한편으로는 뭐 뉴 에이지 스피리추얼라이제이션이라고 한 뭐랄까 뉴 에이지의 뭐 정신주의적 경향들, 아까 말한 뭐 마더 네이처라든지 이런 우리한테 굉장히 익숙한 담론이죠. 예를 들어서 자연의 파괴, 이걸 휴브리스라고 하나요? 네. 인간의 오만, 그리고 거기에 대한 자연의 징벌, 이렇게 설명하는 상당히 익숙한 이런 틀에 대해서도 좀 비판을 해주셨고, 그 이 시츄에이션 자체를 새롭게 보는 방법이 이제 이 강연의 주요한 내용이었던 것 같습니다. 그래서 그 강연의 핵심은 결국은 인간의 역사와 자연의 역사가 이제 구별되지 않는 그런 단계에 왔다라는 것입니다. 그래서 이미 자연사와 인간사의 이제 구별이 없어진다라는 것들을 아까 이제 바이올로지 예를 들어가지고 하신 것 같은데, 이제까지 우리도 생물학이라는 게 이제 분석적 단계에서 기존의 유전자를 조합하는 단계에서 아예 그냥 새롭게 유전자를 구성하는 신테틱 단계로 좀 이제 이행을 했습니다. 그러니까 과거의 자연은 이제 빌렌 플루스의 용어로 말하면 다툼, 주어진 것이었죠. 그래서 우리는 그걸 있는 그대로 보존해야 된다, 이런 것이지만, 사실 빌렌 플루스가 주장하듯이 인간이 태어날 때부터 이미 자연이라는 건 인간에 의해서 만들어진 것, 팍툼이라고 했죠. 그래서 완전히 이제 다른 시각을 갖다 제시하는 것 같습니다. 그래서 자연에 대한 시각이라는 것은 아주 전통적으로 우리가 볼 때는 조화가 잡힌 코스모스의 개념이었는데, 그 어터 컨틴전시 오브 네이처, 쉽게 말하면 그냥 자연 자체가 완벽한 어떤 우연성의 지대다. 그리고 그렇기 때문에 한편으로는 뭐랄까, 우리가 갖고 있는 자연에 대한 관념, 완벽한 책이라든지 이런 것들이 아니라 존재론적으로서 자연 자체가 불완전성을 갖고 있다. 양자역학에서 보여주는 것과 같이 바로 이렇게 자연을 바라보는 것이 현대 유물론적 견해다라고 얘기를 했습니다. 그런 의미에서 이제 서스테이너블리티에 관한 지속 가능한 자연, 또는 생태의 그 자본주의적인 뭐랄까 그 자본주의 시스템의 생태주의적인 제조직이라든지 이런 것들이 갖고 있는 한계를 지적해 주셨습니다. 그리고 이제 강연에서 빠진 부분이 있는데 발제문에 나와 있을 거예요. 여기에 대한 대안으로 얘기했던 게 일단 거부하는 것은 자본주의의 생태적 재구성이라든지 이런 것은 대안이 될 수 없다고 얘기하셨고, 그 다음에 자연으로 돌아가라, 이런 것은 이제 불가능하다, 더 이상 불가능하다라고 얘기를 했고, 문화와 자연의 그 대립 그 너머에 쉽게 말하면 그 자본주의적 체제의 재구성을 넘어서는 어떤 그 근본적인 변혁이라고 할까, 이런 가능성들을 언급한 것 같습니다. 그래서 원문에 보면 something like communism이라고 하는 구절이 나오고요. 또 다른 한편으로는 new mode of collective activity, 새로운 그 활동의 모드를 생각해내야 된다. 그리고 구체적으로는 루소가 말한 아모르드 스와 아모르드 프로프로라고 하는 것, 쉽게 말하면 원래 자연 상태의 그 자아에 대해 사랑이라는 것을 회복하는 것, 이것을 통해 가지고 이제 우리가 새로운 생태적인 전환을 이룰 수 있다고 얘기하는 것 같습니다. 그래서 마지막에 보면 아주 간단한 simple egoist and utilitarian consensus, 이걸 갖다 회복함으로써, 환기시킴으로써도 이 뭐랄까 생태적 재난에서 벗어나는 길을 찾을 수 있다라는 것이 거스름 요약이 될 수가 있습니다. 그래서 여기에 대해서 제가 조금 한 두 가지 정도 질문을 좀 할 게 있는데, 먼저 간단하게 큰 질문부터 하죠. 사실 이 강연 전체가 사실 어떤 대안에 맞춰져, 초점에 맞춰져 있다기보다는 이 사태를 바라본 시각, 이 문제를 어떻게 바라볼 것인가. 아까 프레시 루켓이라고 했죠. 아주 신선하게 바라보는 시각을 소개하는데 집중되어 있기 때문에 이런 질문하는 게 적합할지는 모르겠습니다. 하지만 질문하는 것이 역시 진리라는 것이 역시 구체적이어야 되거든요. 구체적으로 도대체 뭘 의미하는 건지가 좀 불분명한 것 같습니다. 예를 들어가지고 그 아무르드 수화라는 것이 그것을 생태와 관련시켜서 실천하는, 그것도 컬렉티브 액티비티로 실천하는 것이 구체적으로 어떤 모습이며 그것이 어떻게 커뮤니즘의 이상하고 연결될 수 있는지, 이런 것도 상당히 불분명하고요. 한편으로는 그런 것도 있습니다. 사실 생태적인 문제는 우리가 퍼블릭 디시전을 내려야 할 문제인데, 어떤 공적 정책 또는 뭐 테크놀로지의 사용 방향이라든지 이런 공적 담론의 문제인데, 사실 대안으로 제시된 것은 일종의 그 실존 이야기거든요. 예를 들어서 어떻게 보면 미셸 푸코식의, 그러니까 자연이 빠진 루소, 그러니까 미셸 푸코식의 그 자기의 배려라든지 자아의 배려라고 하나, 아니면 이제 거기서부터 자본주의적으로 오염된 자아의, 쉽게 말하면 아모르 프로프로 로부터의 탈주라고 해야 되나, 들려있을 개념으로 말하, 이런 식으로 상당히 개인적인 프라이빗한 쪽으로 얘기가 돼서 지금 괴리가 느껴지는 것 같습니다. 그래서 그 부분에 대해서는 어떻게 생각하시는지 묻고 싶습니다. 먼저.
This question, because it touches the core of the problem. You know, first I admit this gap, because I simply do not know enough to give precise answers. But I hope the point of my reference to Rousseau was the following one. One of the ways that ecologists argue today is that today's civilization, we are hedonists, egotists, caring only for our pleasures, but we should be more ethical, and so on and so on. And what I claim with reference to Rousseau is that no, capitalism at its most brutal is not an example of egotism. Look at an ideal capitalist. He doesn't care for himself. A true capitalist is ready to die working just so that the machine of profit turns around. Capitalist ultimately doesn't care if he ruins the environment, if his children will die, and so on, which is why Walter Benjamin claimed that capitalism is a form of religion. So again, I claim that we proceed too fast when we reproach to capitalists egotism. No, they are not egotists. They just serve a certain machine of profit which is godlike for them. Second thing that I find useful in Rousseau is not so much his notion of egotism, which is naive, I'm even ready to drop it, but how he opposes the good egoism, which he claims is totally social. Because if you really think egoistically, in a good sense, what is good for me, you immediately discover that it's good for me to have others who help me, blah, blah. There is no contradiction for Rousseau between authentic egoism and altruism. But Rousseau does something wonderful, which is deeply true. He introduces the notion of this perverted egoism, which is then envy, resentment, and so on. And as Rousseau puts it in a wonderful way, that the form of evil that we encounter is that instead of caring for your own good, what matters much more to you is that the one who you perceive as obstacle to your happiness is destroyed. So what satisfies you is not your own good, but the unhappiness of the other. And I think that this mechanism is part of capitalism. As the American writer Gore Vidal put it wonderfully, I quote him, that the point of competition is not only that I win. What is more important is that the other loses. No? Or, I'm coming from a nation which is probably pretty dirty in this sense, because we in Slovenia, we have a series of wonderful cynical proverbs, you know, like a god or a magician comes to a small farmer and tells him, okay, I will give you a cow, but I warn you, I will give to your neighbor 2 cows. And then the farmer says, no, rather take one of my cow but just take 2 cows from the neighbor, or even a worse version. A magician comes to Slovene farmer and tells him, I will do whatever you want to you, but I warn you, I will do twice the same to your neighbor. You know what the magician, the Slovene farmer answers? Take one of my eyes. You know, like this mechanism, I claim, is so crucial and deeply true. This mechanism of resentment, envy, and so on and so on. In this sense, Rousseau had a certain naive trust in egoism. I claim that today, I mean it in a very naive way, we need even more egoism, like to fight capitalist exploitation of nature. You don't need any high metaphysical ground, oh, we should care for our posterity. You should just think rationally in an egotistic way. My God, if things go on like this, where will I be in 20, 30 years? Or where will my children be, and so on and so on. And this is the paradox that I like, that we are so, let me use this horrible term, innerly corrupted by capitalist machinery that what appears as the most elementary attitude, a simple rational egotism, I want the best for myself and those who are close to me, is basically the most difficult thing to achieve, you know. You have to work, because all our publicity, did you notice how publicity works? Maybe not the one we saw there, but others, you know. It's always like you and the others. It's not so much you will enjoy this. It's we will like you, or you will be admired to enjoy it, or whatever. It's always what matters is not what you want, but how others will see what you want, how others will perceive it, and so on and so on. And this is also, if I go a little bit to psychoanalysis, I claim, what Jacques Lacan was deeply aware when he said the desire is the desire of the other. How what we desire is always constitutively mediated by what others desire. I desire to be desired by others. I desire what others desire, and so on, all variations. So again, I agree with you that this is not a good conclusion. It was just a modest idea, again, to point out how this moralistic critique of capitalism, capitalist brutal hedonism, egotism, we need higher moral spirit, is not enough. It misses its point. The problem of capitalism is not that it is too egotistic, but it totally distorted a positive egotism. And again, second point, the importance of radical social mediation of what we want, what we desire, and so on and so on. How difficult, and that's the whole point of analytic treatment, psychoanalysis, how difficult, maybe the most painful thing is to really desire what you desire. You know, in everyday life, we are eternally in these compromises. You want something, but you don't really want it. If it comes too close, you don't want it, and so on and so on. You know, like with Hitler, it's clear, to take an extreme case. He allegedly wanted German supremacy, peace. No, that would have been suicide for him. He really just wanted to kill Jews endlessly, you know. That was the whole point, and so on. So I just wanted to complicate things a little bit here.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if I didn't give you a clear answer, but...
두 번째 질문은 그것보다 조금 더 좀 작은 건데, 그 전에 이제 딥 이컬러지스트라고 하는 분들이 이제 한국에도 많습니다. 아시겠지만 뭐 조용기 목사님이라든지 그 밖에 인도네시아 쓰나미가 무슬림에 대한 천벌이다라든지 이런 망언들 하신 목사님들이 상당히 많은 것 같아가지고요. 그런데 좀 다른 버전도 있는 것 같습니다. 예를 들어서 혹시 그 발터 베냐민 언급하셨는데, 발터 베냐민의 초기 에세이에서 인간의 언어에 관하여, 인간의 언어 일반과 특히 인간의 언어에 관하여라는 에세이가 있습니다. 거기서 이제 발터 베냐민은 상당히 über die Sprache in general, 그 논문에서 나타난 것은 이제 거기서도 신을 호출하는데 유대의 신화를 호출해서 얘기를 하는데 그 핵심은 과거의 인간과 사물의 관계, 인간과 자연의 관계라는 것은 1인칭, 2인칭의 관계였다. 그러니까 first person과 second person으로 더 대화적인 관계에 있었는데 그 후에 이제 그 문명화를 통해서 쉽게 말하면 이제 그 문화, 사회 과정을 통해 가지고 인간이 이제 대상들을 3인칭, 1인칭, 3인칭의 관계, 즉 주체와 객체 또는 대상의 관계로 만들어 버렸고 거기서 이 모든 생태의 파괴가 발생했다. 아마도 그것의 정점, 그 이데올로기의 정점에 있는 것이 아마 해겔 철학이 아닌가. 해겔이 말한 그 자연의 인간화라는 것은 결국은 자연의 탈자연화다라는 이제 아도르노의 비판, 또 사실은 발터 베냐민의 이 논문에서 왔는데 중요한 것은 우리가 거기서 발터 베냐민이 신을 불러냈느냐 이 부분은 전혀 중요하지 않다고 보고 그냥 하나의 그냥 신화적인 표현에 불과하고 핵심적인 것은 자연을 대하는 태도의 변화라는 것들. 이렇게 봤을 때 이런 식의 그 말하자면 모더니즘 이후에 포스트 모던한 정식화라고 할 수 있는데 이런 것도 간단하게 딥 이컬러지스트다라고 해서 이렇게 간단하게 비판될 수 있는 것인지 여기에 대한 견해가 어떤지 궁금합니다.
Michael, you really, and I mean this with all sincerity, you are not an idiot. I don't say this to many people, you know what I mean? No. Or rather, you are not a complete idiot. Because I think there are only two types of people. Complete idiots and maybe some people, but you cannot ever be sure, who are not complete idiots. There is no other. The first, I love what you mentioned. You know, it's a wonderful title of Walter Benjamin on language in general and especially concerning human language. You know why this title is ingenious? Because Benjamin is not saying that there is a language in general which is then spoken by animals, apes or gods, and there is only one language. But to understand our language, you must draw a distinction between language as such, what Lacan would have called the order of the big other, and then human language, the way we use this language. So this doesn't mean there is another. It's a wonderful paradox. But going back, the only way I can answer you about this problem of God, first, I hope for you also, let me make my position clear, I'm a total atheist. So when I talk about God, I talk about it as a symbolic fiction and so on and so on. But nonetheless, at this level, I am not sure if I am ready to follow to the end Benjamin. You know why? Because, let me tell you something. I think that the deepest core of the Jewish insight is something very subversive. I encountered it when a friend of mine from Norway showed me a paragraph from a totally unknown Norwegian theologist who proposed a wonderful reading of, probably you know it, you know that story of Job in Old Testament, the one who was tested by God, he lost his family, everything, and you know how this guy reached the story of Job? When then at the end God comes and boasts arrogantly when Job asks him, why did I'm innocent, suffer all this? And God says, oh, who are you to tell about this? I created one. He said that the insight here is that God is great from a proper distance. If you come too close to God, you will see that God is a primitive, barbarian, brutal, and so on and so on. It's the horror of God. And then the entire Jewish religion can be read as this awareness as how to keep God at a distance. Because I quoted again in this Hegel book a wonderful story from Talmud. This is the dialectic of theology which interests me. Which, I warn you, it will sound as a joke, but it's not. It's part of Jewish sacred texts, where two rabbis Jewish priests debate a theological point. And one of them, who is losing the argument, says to the other, like, okay, listen, let's call God, Jehovah, to come here and decide. And then God really comes, an old man. It's like, did you see Woody Allen's Annie Hall? Like, you remember at the beginning, waiting in line for a cinema, two persons debate Marshall McLuhan, and then Marshall McLuhan really comes. And of course, he says to Woody Allen, you are right, the other guy is a total idiot, what we all dream. But what happens here is wonderful. Okay, God comes. But before even God can start to talk, the other rabbi, who was winning, said to God, shut up, old man. You did your creation, you did it bad, you screwed it up, so now it's to us, learned people, to think what you did. You screwed it up, you don't have any right to talk. And then God says, oh my God, you are right, and runs away. This is a wonderful story, I think. So you see, along those lines, I claim that what do we call the divine dimension? Simply what Kant would have called sublime, when something is too terrifying, too strong. Like when you have a terrifying crime like Holocaust, Gulag, there is a divine dimension there, not in an obscene, but in the sense that it's something so terrifying that if you offer a human social explanation, it sounds too vulgar. In this sense, I claim it's wrong to say that in Auschwitz or what Japan did here, or even more horrible, didn't Japanese have in Harbin, Manchuria, some pretty terrifying camp for medical experiments, that God was there in the sense of the horror of God, you know, when you get too close to God. Which is why my favorite, and I love it, it's wrong of course, but it's so beautiful, Gnostic reading of Christianity is that why did Jesus Christ have to die? That is the apology of the stupid God. God is, I'm sorry, I created a bad world. It's a little bit like, you know, the Yakuza, at least so they claim in Hollywood movies. When you do something wrong to a friend, you cut your finger and give it to him as apology, no? That God was a kind of a Yakuza gangster who gave us a finger, his son, as an apology, what a stupid world he created for us, you know. I mean, so again, this may be crazy stories, but I claim there is an existential truth in these stories. So along these lines, I must say, I admire Walter Benjamin, you know, but it's ambiguous and so on. Also, let's not overestimate the consistency of what he is saying. As all great thinkers, he is often, you know, going in one direction, then changing, and you did Lacan, no? Also, so you must know that Lacan, Jacques Lacan, is doing this all the time. That's the horror of Lacan. Especially when Lacan says, now I will only recapitulate what I did the last year. He's cheating. Usually there, he totally changes his position, you know. But I think that this type of debate that we have now is not useless. It's not just we are playing with some metaphors. Existentially, it's very important, I claim.
네, 이제 그 선생님 패널과 이야기들이 자연스럽게 나눠진 것 같은데요. 이제 그 이야기들을 좀 청중석으로 넘겨가지고 청중석에서 또 궁금한 것이 있으면 묻고 또 패널에게 궁금한 것이 있어도 물으셔도 될 것 같아요. 그렇게 상관없이 좀 더 자유롭게 이야기 나눌 수 있으면 좋을 것 같은데 일단 질문사항이 있으신 분은 손을 좀 들어주시기 바랍니다. 오늘은 상당히 좀 부끄러움이 많으신 것 같아요. 손 안 드시네. 그리고 손 좀 정확하게 좀 저기.
Please ask something, otherwise we will have to say some stupid deep wisdom, you know, like your silence is the greatest question to all of us, or something like that.
오늘 강연하고는 좀 거리가 먼 거이지만요. 제가 제 그 가까운 친구에게 듣기로는 지적 선생님이
그래서 자기 소개를 좀 해주시죠.
전 유동욱이라고 하고 와퍼드 컬리지에서 재학 중입니다. 네. 지적 선생님이 신에 대해서 유물론자가 아닌데 무신론자라고 하셨는데 그 부분에서 좀 더 설명을 해주시길 했으면 해요.
그게 무슨 질문? 비물론자인데 무신론자가 아니다고 하는 부분이 있어요.
무신론자라고요. 제가 좀 떨려서.
떨지 마시고 이야기하시면 돼요.
So what I mean is that to be an atheist is much more difficult than it may appear. It's not enough to say God doesn't exist. Because when you say God doesn't exist, you still, how to put it, you still somehow do not ruin the illusory belief which remains operative. Sorry to return to the examples that I used yesterday, but for example, let's take, if you have here something like Santa Claus and so on. Nobody believes in Santa Claus. You don't believe it, or whatever you have here as your local version of it. You say, if I ask you, do you believe in Santa Claus? You would say, no, I'm not stupid. I have to buy the presents and so on. But let's ask your children. They will say, I'm not stupid. I just pretend not to offend my parents and to get the presents and so on. So nobody believes it, but as a social fact, it functions. And I claim that this is why our era, even if it may appear to be atheist, is really deeply religious, but in a bad sense. In the sense that we are in first-person atheists, most of us at least. Oh, I don't believe it, it's all a fiction, blah, blah. But then, one usual excuse of many of my friends is, for me, it's just a custom that I respect, it's a respect for my culture, and so on and so on. You kind of project your belief onto another. Like many parents whom I know go to church and they claim, I don't really believe in God, but I think it's good for the education of my children, and so on and so on. We believe through others, which is why, again, I claim it's much more difficult to be an atheist than it may appear. It's easy. Let me give you an example, the last joke, which I'm sorry if many of you know it because I use it almost in most of my books. That stupid joke, I'm sorry, I'm sure you know it, about a guy who was a madman. He thought that he is a piece of corn, no? And then finally he was cured. So he was left out of psychiatric hospital, but came running back and said to the psychiatrist, my God, I encountered a chicken. And I was afraid that the chicken will eat me. And the psychiatrist says, but now you know that you are human, that you are not a grain of corn. And you know what the guy says? I know it now, but does the chicken know it? Like the problem is for the chicken to know. We all know, but we all have a chicken who doesn't know. This is the status of today's religion, which is all present even with the greatest cynics and so on and so on. So this is why for me, again, the problem of religion is a much more complex one than the one of a simple atheism, I claim. And this is why I deal so often with Christianity. Not because I think that what makes Christianity interesting are those crazy moments like when Christ on the cross says, Father, why have you abandoned me? Where it looks as if God himself no longer believes in himself. It's easy to have people who don't believe in God. It's much more difficult to get a God who doesn't believe in himself. Sorry, I will stop now.
사실 지적 선생님 이론 중에서도 가장 참신한 게 제가 생각할 때 종교에 대한 이야기인데 또 관심도 많으실 것 같아요, 그죠? 지금 사실 시간이 좀 많이 돼가지고 지금 많은 기회를 드리고 싶은데 한
With-
두 개 정도만
Which
더.
one? Has to do with?
그,
No, sorry, I just didn't understand a word. The most fresh idea, blah blah, is
아,
about...
네, just religion. Just
yeah, religion. I'm sorry, please go on. I'm sorry.
종교에
I
대한-
expected
네,
virtue.
종교에 대한 어떤 그런
Sounded
이론적인
strange to me.
상당히
What?
그 대중적인
Yeah.
어떤 그런 임팩트가 강한 것 같아요. 질문을 한 두 개 정도 더 받을 것 같은데 저기 중간에 손을 드신 분 저기 마이크가 어디 있죠? 멀리 갔네. 갑자기 네, 그럼
네, 안녕하세요. 저 코리아타임즈의 곽재엽 기자라고 합니다. Hello, Mr. Sheikh. My name is Jay Kwok. I'm a reporter at the Korea Times. I just found that being incredibly cynical, you almost get to kind of eternal optimism, which I found very interesting. And I mean, I'm talking about how being egotistical will lead to saving the earth in some way. But how, kind of applying that theory to the general sense, are we all able, do you believe that are we all able to know what we desire truly, essentially? And also at what point do we have to decide that this is what we exactly want?
First, I don't see where you saw any optimism. Again, my paradox was that what people perceive as most natural, you know, the usual view is we are spontaneously egotists, and then through fighting your egotism, you start to care for others, blah, blah, blah. No, I think spontaneously we are not egotists. If this spontaneously, in the sense that at the most elementary level, we are evil people full of envy. Even, for example, I think even many egalitarians, they are ready to sacrifice themselves, to deprive themselves of pleasure, but they want a guarantee that you will, you know, it's a way to deprive you of pleasure. Like, I am ready to suffer if you suffer a little bit more, or something like that. I mean, I'm here, very clear, I don't share what some naive Marxists share, some naive optimism on human nature. No, if there is such a thing as a human nature, and I doubt, it's envy, resentment, and I think that was my paradox only, that you have to work very hard, that it's maybe the most difficult thing is to be an egoist. In the sense of really caring for your own good, not secretly, my good is when you drop dead, you know, like... second thing, when you said, can most of the people? No, they cannot. But there are miraculous moments. I'm very modest here. There are emancipatory, revolutionary moments where, at least for some unique point, people drop this constitutive hypocrisy and, in a way, want what they really desire, or however you put it. And I'm not idealizing people. For me, when I talk about communism, first, as I was clear yesterday, I'm not talking about any ideal new order where there will be no brotherhood and love. No, people will be evil, whatever you want, and so on. I'm just saying, in a much more pessimist way, like what you mentioned with this living in the end times, I doubt if things can go on indefinitely like this. We are approaching a series of problems, deadlocks, ecology, biogenetics, and so on, where things will have to change. And the problems we are approaching are the problems of commons, of our, like ecology is our commons, our common good, but I would prefer, for theoretical reasons, just the word commons, like shared substance. Nature is not, I have it, you don't have it. It has to be here for all of us, and so on. All I'm saying is that we've got a problem here. Maybe we will solve it, maybe not. I'm not a Marxist in this old sense of, you know, there is a train of history which leads towards communism and so on. No, the train of history leads towards catastrophe, probably. And as whom you like, Walter Benjamin put it so nicely today. Already he knew it, 100 years ago almost, that today our task is not to ride the train of history, but to pull the emergency brake, you know, to stop the train of history. So no, I don't think I'm naive here. I'm pretty pessimist. I just think that maybe, you know, dangerous situations are always also situations of hope. They are open situations. Maybe it will go worse, maybe it will go a little bit better. That's open. All I'm saying is the true utopia is if you think that if we just suffer a little bit, things can go on indefinitely the way they are now. Sorry?
예,
Sorry, your answer, you mean, is yes. No, I don't believe this.
관중석에는 의도가 잘
Because I
보이지
cannot
않아요.
imagine a world in which China will be one big United States and we all will be happy consumerists.
All right. Yeah. All right. Mr. Zizek, I recently heard one of your interviews in which you said that discussing the Arab Spring and
Yeah.
the changes that have been taking place. And I get the feeling that you are a very staunch revolutionarist. And in one of your speeches, in your interviews, you were advocating violence and the kind of violence that is necessary to topple regimes that are not really legitimate. Now, I want to draw the contrast. Like most people see the Arab Spring, I see that it is nothing new. The world already changed at the time of the Cold War. What is new today? How come that revolutionaries in Poland were able to bring communism down? But today, the Wall Street movement is unable to bring down capitalism. Capitalism is going on and on. And the Occupy Wall Street and all sorts of resistance movements are losing steam. In fact, you have been one of the people advocating for changes. So where does our world go from here?
This is a very tough but good question. Let me begin with this communism and so on and so on. You know, okay, I was there, I remember, 1990, Poland and so on, communism disintegrating. But immediately afterwards, it was a mega disappointment. You know, what was the truly weird thing? The Polish communist regime was so hated that it was absolutely clear that if you have free elections, opposition, okay, Solidarność, whatever, will win. But nobody, absolutely nobody, would have expected that 4 years later, in free elections, communists will be back in power. How do you explain this? I mean, if in 1980 or 85, somebody will tell you, in Poland, in 5 years, there will be free elections where communists will lose power. You would say, probably no, it's difficult. But if somebody were to tell you, but 4 years later, communists will be back in power democratically, admit it, you and me also, all of us would have said, no, that's totally crazy. Now, I'm not praising communists there. They were filthy, corrupted, and so on. I'm just saying that, obviously, people were dreaming about something when they overturned communism, and what they got was not what they wanted, or what they desired. I will not go into this now. And this becomes clear the moment you do something that I did. I spoke with Solidarity people in Poland, I read many of their texts, and it's incredible to what extent Solidarity is basically socialist ideology. Solidarity didn't want capitalist competition. They wanted freedom, dignity, healthcare, and so on and so on. And many people saw this, which is why the common wisdom in the West was that Solidarity was just kind of a naive illusion. You know, now people have tough capitalism and so on. But the lesson of all this is that, okay, capitalism won, but the fight goes on. And now the big question, here I agree with you, is, will the fight go on indefinitely? Will we just have these short utopian outbreaks and then it will return to the same or not? I think no. I think for structural reasons, which I don't have time to explain now, it cannot be that, you know, okay, every 5-10 years people can have a little bit of fun of a local revolution, but things go on. The second point, Egypt and violence. Here I'm very clear. revolution violence. It all depends what do you mean by revolution. For me, Egyptian revolution, I mean Tahrir Square, I don't want to call it even revolution, whatever, was violent in the sense that I advocate violence. Why? Even much more violent than some fascist regime, because for me, the violence that I praise, it's not the violence of course not, torturing and killing. It's the violence of brutally, ruthlessly stopping the dialogue, stopping social life. And don't have illusions here. What the people of Egypt did it was, they occupied the central square and so on, and they brought the whole state to a halt. And they didn't say, now it's the time to negotiate. No, no. Mubarak said, and his regime, okay, you have your demands, we should talk. No, the people said, no debate, you have to go. This is for me what Benjamin called divine violence. But all the real violence was done by whom? By Mubarak people, and don't forget, it was violence done precisely to bring things back to normal. The idea was, enough of this chaos, things should come back to normal. This is why I claimed, and people thought I'm crazy, okay, it's not provocative, that Gandhi was more violent than Hitler. Yes, Hitler killed millions, but because he was afraid to really change the social structure. Hitler killed millions to keep the capitalist system, if you want it in simplistic, I know oversimplistic Marxist term. What Gandhi wanted in India was something that Hitler never dared to want. Gandhi wanted to bring to a halt, to stop the functioning of the British state there. What Hitler wanted was precisely for the German state to function normally. And he was ready to kill millions to do this. So this is all about my violence and so on and so on. A, we should be very precise. Where is violence? What type of violence? But also, there is another point. We should also, you know, when people talk about violence, we should be careful about where do you see violence. Automatically, spontaneously, we tend to see only violence which interrupts the normal run of things. Like, you have a disorder, you have a revolution, oh my God, violence. But what about the violence which goes on all the time and we are simply used to it, or rather used to ignore it? Like, do you know that every week, for example, in the Republic of Congo, there is more violence than in all Libya and Tahrir Square revolutions together? We just ignore it. And we know it. Check it out. In mid-90s, there was a cover story on the Time magazine which proved in the last 10 years, 4 million people at least died in Congo of unnatural causes. And at some debate in New York, I met the editor-in-chief of Time magazine. And he told me he was shocked. He thought there would be some big outcry. No, nothing. 1 or 2 letters by readers. You know, it's out of our focus. And this is where, I'm not saying I support violence, but where I feel that then some people who rebel kill a couple of people and we say horrible, barbarian, blah, blah, blah. But my God, what is going on now in many countries and so on and so on? Are we aware what tremendous amount of violence is needed just to keep the thing turning around normally? This is for me the problem. And I don't, to be very clear, I'm horrified about Arab terror or other fundamentalist terror. I'm not those stupid leftists who claim Arabs suffered or Palestinians suffered so much that they can do a little bit of terror against Israel, even a little bit of anti-Semitism. No, I absolutely don't accept this. What I'm nonetheless saying is, when you talk about violence, first be honest and look at all violence which is here, especially the invisible violence. It's horrible how, for example, take Zimbabwe. When was Zimbabwe elevated into the horror? The moment, and I'm totally against Mugabe, the moment Mugabe, the ruling party, started to evict white farmers. But they had in Zimbabwe already before incredible terror against other black groups. Like, it's well known that immediately after Mugabe took over in early 90s, or when late 80s, I forgot, he practically killed 10,000 people. Another city, the entire city was eradicated, which was the stronghold of the opposition. The West didn't even protest this, and so on and so on. And now, when they were not even killed mostly, some 100, 200 white farmers were evicted. Again, I'm not for this eviction. I'm just saying that let's see all of violence. My God. Now you will do the violent gesture.
2008년서 그래서 지금 시간이 다 돼가는데요. 딱 한 분만 더 받겠습니다. 저 뒤에 모자 지금 흔들고 계시는 분 계속 지금 흔들고 계시는데 어쨌든 한 분만 받고 나머지 질문들이 많으시겠지만 지금 내일 또 출근해야 되시는 분들 있잖아요. 그래서 좀 소개 좀 해주시고.
Yeah, I'm teaching in Korea now in university about art. Okay, so I'm really like deeply moved about way of thinking, your way of thinking. So my question is this: what makes you think like that?
Like what? Which I think there are many me. The guy who makes tasteless, stupid jokes, or the guy who speaks about ecology. I don't know. I think I was just lucky if I give you a general answer. I was lucky for being born in a country which was a communist country, but a soft communist country. So, you know, we were in between. Borders were totally open. We didn't have any illusions about communism, the East European communism, Stalinism, because we were nonetheless part of it. At the same time, we didn't have any illusions about the West. You know, for us, the fall of communism was not a big event. Oh my God, now we can buy banana and pornography. Pornography was there from the early 80s, totally liberated. There was more pornography under communism than after, and so on. So what I want to say is that this was one lucky thing. The other lucky thing was that when I was young and student, in Slovenia, the big struggle in theory was between Heideggerians and Frankfurt School. Frankfurt School was close to official party philosophy. Heideggerians were dissidents. And then a miracle happened. This explosion of the new French thought, so-called structuralism, post-structuralism. And we, the younger generation, were so shocked how these guys who were supposed to be the ultra enemies, Heideggerians, Frankfurt School, they all reacted in such a furious, violent way against this French structuralism. They used exactly the same language. So we simply applied this lesson that when the enemies start to speak the same language, this is the symptomal point. This is the true third way, you know, which moves out. And again, I was lucky to be there, and I was even more lucky, sorry if I repeat this story, I have a great gratitude for my international career. My greatest gratitude goes to, without irony, to communist oppression. Because in '73, when I finished my master's degree, however you call it here, I already was planned to get a job as an assistant professor. Then, hardline communists regained power for some time, and I was unemployed for 4 years. It wasn't difficult. My parents supported me at the translations, and then I got placed at the research institute, where I'm totally free. I'm even now there. I do nothing. Literally. I just send them my bibliography. That's what interests them. So you see the paradox. When people ask me, what would be with you without communist oppression? I can tell them I know exactly what I would have been without communist oppression. A stupid local professor of philosophy in Slovenia. This is the madness of history. That's all.
Thank you.
감사합니다. 마지막 질문은 재밌게 끝나네요.
Sorry?
질문? 저기 그러면 마지막 한 분 하시고 지금 10시거든요. 조금만 오늘 제가 좀
예.
그래서
안녕하세요. 저는 저랑 그 동료들이랑 같이 해서 웹 매거진을 만들고 있는 편집자 최형욱인데요. 다름이 아니라 제가 어떤 웹 매거진을 만든 어떤 그런 계기가 SNS에서 관한 거였기 때문에 SNS와 그리고 지식인의 어떤 역할에 대해서 여쭤보겠습니다. SNS 때문에 지식인이 아닌 견습생의 경우에서도 지식인이 될 수 있는 기회가 많고 그리고 여러 가지 컨텐츠를 유용하게 이용할 수 있기 때문에 어느 정도 지식인이 아니어도 노출될 수 있는 환경이 굉장히 많은데요. 그렇기 때문에 저 같은 소시민으로서 그냥 일반 시민으로서 그런 어떤 시야를 보게 되면 이 사람은 진실을 말하는 건지 아니면 정말 알고 있는 건지 혹은 정말 그냥 자신의 어떤 커리어를 위해서 이런 뭐 퍼포먼스를 하는 건지 아니면은 뭐 다른 진짜 지식인으로서 어떤 사명감을 갖고 있어서 이런 식으로 어떤 뭐 글을 쓰거나 어떤 다큐멘터리를 만들거나 이런 식으로 행위를 하는 거에 대해서 일반 소시민의 입장에서는 굉장히 알아보기가 굉장히 어려운데요. 이러한 같은 상황에서 지금 이렇게 빨리빨리 노출이 되고 쉽게 흘러나가고 무시당하고 이렇게 유행도 없고 이런 식의 진행이 되고 있는 이런 시대에서 일반 시민으로서 할 수 있는 어떤 선택의 어떤 기준이 있다면 뭐가 있을까요? 그게 전부입니다.
Okay, very brief answer in two parts. First, maybe I will disappoint you here, but okay, I use internet, of course, but I'm terrified of all other media. Like, I already hate Skype. Why? Because in Skype, if you do also the visual Skype, you can see your partner. And this makes me more difficult to lie. Most of the communication for me is lying. Like, I'm invited and I have to lie because I don't want to go, and it's difficult to lie when you... Or Facebook is for me pure loss of time. There are 2-3 Facebook sites which claim to be me, but it's all other people claiming to be me. I don't do this. I mean, I'm extremely traditional here, even in popular music. For me, it's my generation. Rock music was something which started in 65 and ended in 75. And all that comes after Michael Jackson, these areas and so on, it doesn't exist for me. So this would be the first point. What was the second point, sorry, about? This is a very good question. You know, and the answer is extremely pessimist one. You don't have any guarantee, especially in philosophy, unfortunately. It's a field where you don't have even a minimal, like maybe what you have in sciences, objective measures. You can be a total idiot and bluff totally, and still you can make a philosophical career. So the problem is not, you should be even more paranoia. Don't suspect only people like me, like, is he serious with all his jokes and so on and so on. I can guarantee you that books which are boring and grey with all scientific apparatus are maybe bluffing even more than. And there is no way to, there is only one way to really get into it. You can trust no one. There is no guide, philosophical guide or whatever, which will tell you, you know, wait a minute, this philosopher is bluffing, that one is serious. You cannot trust anyone. We philosophers are horrible. Like, analytical philosophers think the entire so-called continental philosophy, Heidegger, it's just pure bluff, it's over. People in certain type of continental philosophy, like Frankfurt School, think I'm an obscenity and so on. Don't even want to pronounce my name. Don't even let mention what I think about others and so on and so on. So it's, no, what I mean is that it's a crazy situation where there is no shortcut. You know, like in science, even I admit it, I'm too stupid to fully understand quantum physics, so you look these popular introductions and so on. And I hope I'm not totally wrong, like I trust them implicitly. But in philosophy, okay, there are some good introductions, but there is, I know of no general introduction which will be fair and give you a kind of a global mapping. This is good, this is bad, ignore this. And it's, in a way, it's a sad situation, because again, for so-called ordinary people, and I use this term as a very, very honorable one, it's extremely difficult And again, the only thing you have is your own mind. There is no shortcut. Even with me, like, if you say, this guy looks a little bit suspicious to me, maybe some interesting ideas here and there, but maybe too many jokes. Is he covering with this the fact that he doesn't really know what's talking? All I can tell you is, yes, I can well imagine that after only hearing me here, you may have these doubts. There is only one way. Read some big fat book. Not those easy ones, Iraq and so on. Read, I don't know, this is translated, Parallax, pairing with the negative, whatever, and you will see it there. There is no shortcut here, you know. This is the good thing about philosophy. No, it's in no way can you have someone to tell you, this is it, and so on and so on. You are lost. You are on your own.
네. 자, 결론적으로 쉬운 길은 없습니다. 어렵게 어려운 책을 읽어라. 이게 오늘 결론인 것 같은데요. 어려운 쉬운 길을 택하면 어려운 길을 찾아가야 한다는 것이고요. 사실 쉬운 해결책은 없겠죠. 그래서 오늘 어떻게 강연을 들으셨는지 모르겠고 또 여기 나와주셨던 패널 선생님들 좋은 말씀 많이 해주셨고요. 그래서 더 많은 이야기를 나눴으면 좋겠지만 또 시간이라는 것이 있기 때문에 지금 또 끝나야 될 시간인 것 같습니다. 그래서 모두 전부 수고하셨고요. 지금 오랫동안 수고해주신 지식선생님께 큰 박수를 한번 드립니다. 감사합니다. 이것으로 이제 톡 콘서트로 불러야 될까요? 톡 콘서트로 마치도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다. 안녕히 들어가십시오.